The second trap door. It was summer, and Auntie Jessie had given birth to her new baby 2 months ago. That's why Zach and Ivy were here in Toronto, instead of back in Australia where they lived. They had come with their parents to visit the new baby. Everyone was visiting at Bobby and Zadie's house, since Zach and Ivy were sleeping there with their mom and dad. The adults were all excited about the new baby. Lasha, Jalen, Zach, and Ivy didn't think the new baby was so amazing. All it did was sleep, nurse, and cry. What's so special about that? Lasha ran up to Zadie and asked, "Can we go up to play in the attic?" Lasha and Jalen had been up in the attic last year, and they wanted to show Zach and Ivy the old toys and furniture that were stored up there. "It's dark up there and a little cold. Are you sure that's where you want to play?" asked Zadie. "Yes," said Jalen. "There's lots of my daddy's old toys up there. And there are dolls too. I remember from last year." "Excuse me," said Ivy. "I like dolls. Is there a toy kitchen up there too?" Zach asked, "Are there transformers or robots up there?" "I don't think so," said Lasha. "The toys are mostly old, but we can explore anyway. It will be fun." "Okay," said Zadie. "Let's go upstairs, and I'll pull the trap door down to let you in. But you have to be very careful." They went to the second floor of the house. Zadie took down the wooden stick that hung on the door frame of the upstairs bathroom. It had a small hook on the end. Zadie placed the hook through an eyelet at one end of the trap door, while the four children watched to see what would happen next. Then he pulled it down. The trapdoor hinged open, revealing a folded-up stairway, which then Zadie proceeded to unfold. Now there was a set of stairs that went from the floor right up to the ceiling. Zadie climbed up the stairs and pushed up on another door that opened into the attic. Immediately there was a rush of cold air that fell down from the attic. It made all of the children shiver. Zadie climbed back down the stairs and said, "Who's first to go up?" Lasha, being the oldest at 11 years old and the most experienced, said, "Me first," and she started up the stairs into the attic. Jalen, who was 8 years old, went next, and then came Zach, who was 7 years old. Ivy, who was the youngest, was left at the bottom of the stairs with Zadie. She was only 4 years old. "Do you want to go up too, Ivy?" asked Zadie. Ivy nodded her head yes, even though she was a little frightened. "Okay, I'll help you." Ivy held onto the railings on both sides of the stairway and started up the stairs. Zadie put his hands on her waist to steady her as she climbed. Step by step, Ivy went higher until she reached the top of the stairway. It was dark and cold there. Zadie was right behind her. Then he lifted her up over the wooden edge of the opening so that Ivy stood in the attic. Her eyes weren't used to the dark yet, but she could hear her brother Zach and her cousins, Lasha and Jalen, moving around the attic. She just couldn't see them. All of a sudden, Lasha appeared holding out her hand. "Here I am, Ivy. Hold my hand and I'll show you around." Then Ivy's eyes got used to the dark, and she could make out the shapes around her. They were beams of wood that were part of the underside of the roof of the house, just above her head. In fact, Lasha had to duck her head down to travel around, or she would get a nasty bump. Ivy was the perfect size, since she was a lot smaller than Lasha. Jalen and Zach only had to tip their heads down a little to avoid the beams. There were boxes and other odd shapes all around the attic. Zadie still stood on the stairway with only his head and shoulders sticking into the attic. There are some rules, kids, about being up here. First, don't come close to this trap door without calling me first, so then I can help you climb down. Second, no running around, or you will probably bump your head on the wooden beams. Otherwise, have a good time exploring. Just call if you need me or if you want to come down the stairs. And with that said, Zadie disappeared down the stairway, out of sight. Lasha and Ivy moved around the attic, holding hands. The floor was made of gravel held in place with tar. It used to be the original rooftop of the house before the new pitched roof was added. There were boxes of old toys all around. Some old artwork projects that used to belong to the children's parents were hanging from the rafters. There was a tricycle in the attic, as well as a toy baby carriage. Jalen and Zach were pulling toys out of one of the boxes. As they were walking around, Ivy looked up at the underside of the roof of the house. "Excuse me, Lasha, what's that?" Ivy said, pointing up at the roof. Lasha's head was at the right level of that structure that Ivy was pointing at. It looks like another trap door," said Lasha. "I never noticed that last year. I wonder if it opens to the outside." Lasha pushed on the trap door, but nothing happened. It seemed to be stuck. Jalen and Zach came over to see what was happening. "Why doesn't it open?" said Zach. "Try flipping that switch beside the trap door," said Jalen, and she pointed to a switch that was right beside the door. Lasha flipped the switch, and automatically the second trap door slowly started to creak open. It did open to the outside. Sunlight and warmth started to come through the opening. But something was wrong. Instead of looking out at the rooftops of the neighboring houses, the children could see a grassy meadow through the opening in the roof. It was almost as though they were looking out of a rabbit hole in the ground, instead of out of the rooftop of the house. What was going on? Lasha, being the tallest, easily put her hands on the opening of the second trap door and lifted herself up through. The sights and sounds of trees and a meadow were all around her. Jalen and Zach poked their heads up through the opening and looked around too. Lasha helped them climb up out of the attic into the meadow. Then Ivy held up her 2 arms to be lifted. Lasha was quite strong and easily lifted Ivy up into the meadow as well. The children couldn't believe their eyes and ears as they looked around. It looked just like a beautiful park. Just then, a rabbit hopped up to them, stood on its hind legs, and said, "Where did you come from?" The mouths of 3 of the 4 children dropped open from surprise. "Excuse me," said Ivy. "I was going to ask you the same question."